Welcome to Bipolar She. I'm your host, Janine Noel. Before we get started, the content of this show does include suicide and suicidal ideation. If you are ever in need of immediate support, please dial 988, a suicide and crisis lifeline. I believe in the healing power of writing and speaking our mental health stories in all their raw details. So let's go. Today I sit down with Dan, who at age 40 has battled major depression since he was a kid. When Dan sunk into one of the worst depressions of his life, he learned that psilocybin or magic mushrooms could help, so he embarked on a journey with psychedelics. A singer-songwriter performing under the name of Connor Echo, Dan's releasing his newest song, Standing Up, on January 24th. It's streaming everywhere, and there's also a documentary you can watch at connorecho.com. Before we begin, psilocybin is a psychedelic, a class of psychoactive substances that produce changes in perception, mood, and cognitive processes. Psilocybin is illegal at the federal level, but is legal in a few states and cities. However, if you are bipolar like me, or if you have any type of delusional disorder, you should not take psychedelics. Adverse effects include paranoia, and in some studies, patients had an increase in suicidal ideation. I believe in mental health stories where we learn through others, even if it's a trip I will never take.
Hi, Janine.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You have a history of depression. I'd like to learn a little bit about that.
Yeah. So probably the first time I noticed it, I was a teenager, but thinking back and reflecting on things, I probably had some level of depression, even younger than that. So I'm 40 now. So it's been something that I've had with me through my whole life. We'll probably get into some of this a little bit later, but I've been working with a therapist over the past few years where we've experimented with some of these psychedelics that you mentioned in the opening. And he said when he met me a little over 2 years ago, I was clinically depressed. However, very recently, within the past few weeks, he's told me that I am no longer clinically depressed. That's a pretty amazing thing. So 40 years of maybe being, clinically depressed and maybe not anymore. It's kind of a nice thing to kind of think about and reflect on.
And for you, what were the main symptoms of this clinical depression?
First thing I think I noticed when I was really young was just feeling kind of disconnected and maybe hopeless, crying, not being motivated. Well, maybe all teenagers just want to sleep in all day. But I've even noticed this later on in life where you don't want to go outside. You don't want to see people. The things that usually make you happy don't necessarily make you happy anymore. You feel like you're stuck. And sometimes, you even think about things like suicide in some cases when it's worse, where you consider, is it worth being alive? And just like this overwhelming sense of like hopelessness and despair and kind of being stuck in that and not knowing how to get out of it.
And that was even in your early teen years?
Yeah. I definitely experienced that in my teen years. And then there has been moments where it has been better and then worse through my life. I think I was pretty constantly depressed. Severely depressed for most of my life.
And just so listeners know, a major depressive episode can just be 2 weeks of feeling those symptoms. So handling that for years is quite a burden.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps when you say that, because I probably read that before, but I haven't really thought about it. And I think maybe that's something that's really hard for people that do have it, which why maybe some people take their lives, is because, it's just such a hard thing to live with. I've thought about it. I've had some moments where I've almost did things. And in fact, when I was maybe 19 years old, I took some pills and told a friend on AOL Instant Messenger, back when people were using that I was going to do that. And she showed up. Maybe her showing up, maybe that stopped me from actually taking the other pills that I was planning on taking. And, maybe if she hadn't showed up, maybe I would have, or maybe I wouldn't have. I don't know, right? I don't know where that line is that's being crossed, but I think it, says a lot that if you have serious depression, through your life, and a lot of people do have this more than 2 weeks, it's something very hard to live with.
Yes. Having bipolar, I do understand the lows of that depression. When you're about 20 years old and you have to make some decisions, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, my father passed away when I was 19. So my parents divorced, back when I was in 6th grade. I didn't have a close relationship with my father. And as we might learn in some of our discussions, there's a lot of negative things about my relationship with him and our family. But that moment of him dying when I was 19, as it's hard for anybody when, a family member dies, especially at a young age like that, really hit me hard and made my depression get a lot worse. And I, had this kind of moment where I was inspired to follow what you really want to do, follow your dreams, and, life is short. I had gone to college because that's what family told me to do. I didn't really want to, but it's like, you have to go to college or you join the military. And I didn't want to join the military, but all I really wanted to do was play music and to write songs. That was a really therapeutic thing for me whenever I started doing it. And I loved doing it. And that's all I wanted to do. So after my father died, I decided then I'm going to go to a college where I can study being a songwriter. And I knew of Berklee College of Music in Boston, which is known as like one of the best music schools in the world. And John Mayer went to Berklee College of Music. And I was like, well, if, John Mayer goes there and he's successful, maybe I could go there and be successful. And I think I told you when we talked recently how I clearly remember holding the acceptance letter. I got accepted into Berklee College of Music for songwriting. That was one of the best days of my life. And that was so powerful. I was like, okay, I'm going to go do this. Unfortunately, I had some hard conversations with my mother about that, where I let her talk me out of going, because her viewpoint at the time, that was not a practical thing for me to do. It was going to be too expensive. And Berklee College of Music is very expensive. Instead, she suggested I try the school in Minnesota, and I could go there to study music business, which isn't what I wanted to study, but they had a minor in songwriting. So that was the appeal that my mother was trying to present to me. And I chose to do that. And ever since then, for a long period of time, and I've come around to this recently, but for a while, I kind of gave up on myself, gave up on what I really wanted to do. I think there was this moment, 20 years ago, where I really wanted to kind of drop everything and run towards my dreams. And then instead, at that moment, and I want to point out, too, this is not my mother's fault. I think, hold kind of a grudge about this, but I forgive her for this. I understand why. I wish she would have supported that and said, we'll find a way and we'll make it work. Do it, follow your dreams. Like, I wish that was the response I got. But at the end of the day, it was my decision to do what I did. But I chose to give up on myself. And, I think part of the reason why maybe I did that, because I wasn't strong. Like we said, I've been depressed like most of my life, and I didn't have the willpower to stand up for myself. And I've only recently been able to get that willpower to stand up for myself. So that was 20 years ago where I made this pivotal decision, and all kinds of stuff has happened since then. It's not that I completely stopped doing music, but my heart wasn't fully in it. And, I think if I would have went to Berklee, maybe I would have decided to then move to LA or Nashville or, New York and like go all in. Right. But I didn't. And I really, it was always kind of a side thing for a while. Right. And I did release some music as myself, as Dan Peluso Band. And I was in a really really interesting band called Falling Andes and made some great music with some great people. And I'm really proud of that. But I gave up on it again like 10 years ago, and I ended up getting a PhD in astrophysics. So I've had some diversions. But now I'm coming full circle. I'm really proud of the journey that I've been on since then. And I don't regret things anymore.
Yeah, so this is interesting. We can start to talk about the use of psilocybin.
Of course.
And for you, I mean, it has to do with your music and putting yourself back into the music scene.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to learn about music and also this form of therapy that you have used and had some success with.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It is really interesting. First, I'll say that the music itself and songwriting itself is therapy for me. That's something also that I've learned through this journey. It's a part of who I am. It's something I need to continue to do, whether I quote unquote make it or not in like music, whether no one ever listens to my music or I never release anything. Like it's something that I have to do for myself. It's a part of who I am. It's my identity. And I think that's something that I struggled with for a long time. But getting into the psychedelics and the psilocybin, it's kind of interesting. And I think this will tie into some of the stuff that we said we wanted to talk about. Before I decided to do psilocybin, I was still struggling with depression pretty severely. And then I had this freak accident where I got a concussion, a pretty severe concussion. And I had some concussions when I was a teenager, at least one really, really severe one. And then this one was in March of 2021, was a pretty serious concussion as well. And it caused me to have post-concussion syndrome. And I actually had to take a leave of absence from my PhD program at the time. And I was seeing a vestibular therapist because I was having daily migraines. I was getting dizzy, being in the car, moving. I was getting nausea. I was told to stay away from phones and computers. But the one thing that I found that I could do that didn't make my concussion symptoms worse. And by the way, too, another thing that came out of this, which is probably the most important thing that I'm neglecting to mention, is that this caused my depression to get like maybe the worst it's ever been, or, in the top 3 worst that it's ever been in my life, like very bad. And the one thing that I could do though is go and play music. Okay. And in fact, the song that I just recently recorded, it's called Standing Up. I started writing it during this dark period. And I was laying on the couch, I was home alone, and I was having this very deep depressive moment and was having suicidal thoughts and was really feeling hopeless. And I was laying, and in the corner of the room was my piano, and I just looked at it, and I don't know exactly what it was, but it was like this little light. The music was there, like the piano was there, and I chose to stand up and go like write a song. Like I was like, I have to, like I'm either gonna, think about taking my life, or I'm gonna go like write about it and make art. And I chose to stand up and write about it. And that's not the only song that has been very therapeutic to me, but that's why I chose to do this song and to talk about it and talk about this experience. But later came the psilocybin. That came about a year or so later. My concussion symptoms got a lot better, but I wasn't fully better. I was still getting weekly migraines, and the vestibular therapy did help, but I was still struggling. And a friend of mine mentioned magic mushrooms to me. He said, have you tried magic mushrooms? I was like, magic mushrooms? I think in my early 20s, I might have, experimented with a very small amount of them or something and watched some fun movies, but I never heard of this being used for like a head injury or something, right? So being a researcher, I went full into it and read books and read papers and listened to podcasts, and there's a lot of great information about it. And I was like, well, I don't know, I want to try this, because I also found out that not only can it be helpful for people that have head traumas and are experiencing these concussion symptoms, it's been known to be extremely effective for helping people with depression. And I was having both of them. And I was like, well, maybe this is like an amazing thing that could help with both my depression and the concussion. So then that's when I sought out a therapist that was willing to help me go through the process of using psilocybin for, mental health therapy. And I did my first trip, psychedelic experience with him in August of 2022.
So I'm curious how you found this therapist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's MAPS. It's the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. And they have a list of therapists who do psychedelic integration therapy. So, certified therapists that are trained in psychedelic therapy. And most of them are just doing this for ketamine, okay? Because that is legal to do ketamine. But some of them, if you reach out to them, they're open to using, more traditional psychedelics like psilocybin and some even LSD or MDMA. As a side note, there is like a huge body of research currently from big research universities. Johns Hopkins University has a lot of great studies. UCLA, University College London, places all over the world are finding this to be extremely effective and powerful way to treat depression and other mental health disorders and even concussion symptoms.
Right. So those studies, they're very controlled. But in an office setting, like how does this work? Because it's going to take 4 to 6 hours to go all the way through it.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that the setting has to be really particular and safe. And sometimes your eyes are closed, sometimes they're open, sometimes there's music.
Yep.
I know it's all very personal and maybe you don't want to share it because it's a very sacred thing to you. But if there are any parts you're open to sharing?
Oh, I'm totally open to sharing. Not everything, but I'm definitely open to sharing some of this, and it's exciting to talk about. So I had 3 large dose trips with my therapist, and I did 2 on my own of like a smaller dose that is above a microdose, but not like as much as I took with my therapist. So I guess it's been a total of like 5 over the past 2 years. Given a lot of thought about this because I did start looking through my journals, and one thing that's really powerful, I'll say about the psychedelics too, is I've always known that journaling is really important for mental health. And I've journaled sometimes in the past, but never really stuck with it, right? The day after I took the first trip, I started journaling, and I filled an entire journal within like 2 months, and I was motivated to do so. And then I filled another journal like, I don't know, 6 to 8 months later. But writing about these experiences is really important because then it helps you to unpack like what you've learned and what the lessons are. That's why like a really important part of this is working with a therapist afterwards. And I'm finding is that it's the dust that settles afterwards and you see the results 6 months to a year later. So a lot of stuff that happened in that first trip and that second trip and even that third one, I'm really just starting to understand that now. And I'm starting to see the effects now. I'll probably continue to see that like throughout my life in different ways. I've heard stories where people will, maybe it's years later and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, like that's what that was about. And then they have this like healing moment from it. So it's not this like magic bullet. It's a catalyst, a very, very powerful catalyst. And since it's so powerful, it needs to be respected. It needs to be taken seriously. But it can have very positive results, and it has for me. So that first trip was about, in summary, it was about healing and rebirth. I do remember, in fact, a different song that I wrote about this experience is called So Long, and I talk in one of the verses how I see the sounds, I heard the nightmares, and then I burnt away. These are lyrics I wrote about looking at the journal writings that I did. And music was played. So that's an important part is having music. Now you're not going to want to play like death metal. That's probably a bad idea. Usually they find, music without words. So kind of stuff you'd hear if you were to go to the spa and have like a massage. There's been actual research where they've developed like, oh, what's a good playlist, for someone's journey? And you're right. It's like 4 to 6 hours. Wear an eye mask. So when you take these psychedelics, when you wear that eye mask, then the journey becomes inward instead of outward. And that can be hard. So my first trip, I saw, sounds like colors, and I saw like desert worlds and like stars and traveling through space and like all kinds of really cool like visuals that were amazing, right? That were really cool. And then you'd take them off to go to the bathroom or something, and then like the floor was moving and it looked like sand, and it was a pretty cool experience. I'm not gonna lie. There was also like hard things too. I didn't have like a bad trip that first one. It definitely opened up a lot of great conversations with my therapist while we were there. And yeah, I'm laying down and he's like sitting in a chair off to the side, and he's there to make sure that I'm okay and nothing bad happens, and help me if I were to have a bad trip, and is more there as just like a support person, like, as a guide, right? And we talked about a lot of things during that first trip. And I remember the next day I woke up at like 4 a.m. I had all this energy, and I went to my whiteboard in my office, and I drew like this picture that was associated with it. And it was of me looking down at myself dead. And this might sound really morbid. Okay. But this wasn't like a morbid, this was actually a very like, kind of spiritual, uplifting, like powerful healing type of thing. Cause one of the things I did see in the first trip was I saw an image of myself burning away, almost like my body in the sky and the streams of particles like burning away from myself. And I interpret it as, this is me being rebirthed, being reborn, and starting the healing process. So that's why I named that first trip Healing and Rebirth. And then the second one was a bad trip. And here's a thing that I read about, and then I experienced it myself. The bad trips are scary and they're hard, but they end up being, I think, the ones you learn the most from. So that second trip I had, I title that Facing My Fears. And I don't think I would have been ready to face my fears if it wasn't for that first trip that kind of like opened the door for that.
So how long after the first trip?
Oh, good question. So the first trip again was in August 2022, and I did the second one in November, just a few months later.
So you weren't seeing stars and having this real pleasant experience. Were there any parts that were difficult, but you're able to talk about them?
Yeah. So, but I want to say real quick that all of the trips, the first part is always hard, at least for me. Like the first 30 to 45 minutes, they call it like the come up, or, you're starting to go from not tripping to tripping, basically. And for me, in each one of those instances where I've taken a large dose, I have a somatic experience and my body shakes and like, I feel like I'm going to die. And that second trip, it didn't begin like difficultly, besides that come up part. I remember I was in some like weird like cosmic room of the gods. There was like some like alien being playing like a flute, and it was just, I don't know, it was like just a fun visual experience, right? But then like things changed. The music changed, and then things changed for me too. And my therapist, he's kind of like this like wise kind of like guide, and he goes to like South America, and experiences things with elders and indigenous people, and he had these like leaves that he was shaking that I think he had brought back from somewhere. And I remember him shaking those leaves, and like I felt like I was being like reborn again, and I was like getting eaten by insects, and like I was becoming a part of the ground and like dying. But then again, that wasn't like necessarily an unpleasant experience. And then all this things changed and got kind of dark after that. And there is this house that I grew up in, originally from Beaver, Pennsylvania. And this house has always had kind of like a dark cloud around it. And I still don't really know exactly why. And in fact, that was kind of the thing that I've been unpacking a lot, is not worrying about the why and understanding exactly what happened like in that house, because I might not ever know, but just understanding how it made me feel, and about, healing and forgiveness, both for myself and for, everyone else in my life. But that part of the trip, I experienced some pretty dark things like in the house, and things that I'm pretty sure never actually happened, but were really scary for me at the time. And I'd prefer not to go into specifics of what I experienced in that, but it was really, really challenging. And I think this is also a good point to make why it's really important to work with a trusted therapist if you're doing this for mental health reasons. Because if you do have a really bad trip like this and you're just doing it by yourself, it could be something hard for you to deal with, right? Because it was so hard for me when this happened that I think I like broke for a moment. Like I definitely broke, and I was crying, and like I felt like stuck. But having my therapist there, he was awesome and knew exactly like what to do to help. He helped me out of being stuck, and if he wasn't there to help me through that, maybe I would have been okay. But then maybe it would have been a lot harder to move forward from that.
So, what does this integration period look like? Are you going weekly to see him after?
Yeah, it's weekly. So my therapist and I meet weekly. Now lately we've been kind of on more of a weekly or biweekly schedule because I've made such like positive progress that he doesn't feel that I need to be seen every week. But sometimes I'm like, I'd rather talk to you, next week. And sometimes we do. And there is like a plan in place, I think, where, I might, I want to say graduate from therapy, but where he feels like I might not need it anymore. And that looks like that might be happening in the near future too. But up until this past, summer, so right now it's November 2024. So up until probably about September of 2024, we were seeing each other on a regular basis every week. And it's really important, especially after you have one of these experiences, that you're probably going to talk to your therapist, and at least mine did to me, like the next day, like, are you okay? Like how are you doing? And he made sure to call me the next day. We had a plan to have a short conversation and possibly another therapy session later in that week. But definitely in the weeks following that, you start to unpack things. And I'm still talking to him today about some things that pop up. So that is the most important part. The psychedelics are like that catalyst that like really accelerates things and helps you to face things that maybe you wouldn't be able to face on your own. And and it really does have like a physical effect on your brain, like all these other positive effects. But having those discussions with the therapist and putting the work in is really important. And if you can do that, you can make some amazing changes in your life.
Yeah. And there's also so many questions about creativity post journey.
Oh, yeah. So after the concussion, I rediscovered music again, right? Because I had basically not been doing it, for a good bit, because I kind of stopped doing it after I went back to school 10 years ago. I created a new artist persona called Connor Echo, CONNEREKO. And I released my first single as Connor Echo, Sync, in August of 2021. And after I did the psilocybin experiences, I definitely noticed, an increase in like creativity, an improvement, I think, in my ability to write. And above all, this is the most powerful thing, I think, is coming full circle. So I mentioned in the beginning how I felt like 20 years ago, I had a choice to run towards my dreams or away from them. And I chose to, in a way, run away from them in some respects. I used to regret that for a long time. And in fact, there's my new song, which I'm releasing, there is a line. So it starts off and I say, many years since I left. And that's speaking specifically since I left home and decided to go do these other things, right? And the next line is choices I regret. That used to be the line, choices I regret. I've changed that line. In fact, in the final recording, it now says choices do I regret. And I mean, that's up to listeners to decide. And I'll say now, I don't regret that anymore because I got lost, when I chose to not go to Berklee. That made me kind of get lost in a way. And over the past 20 years, I've been able to really find myself, and there's all kinds of positive experiences, like meeting my wife. I am proud that I've got a PhD in astronomy and I like being an educator. But now I know, like, at heart, like, who I am as an artist, as a songwriter. And now, like, I'm more excited moving forward about making my art again and putting out amazing art and doing music. More excited than I have been since I got that letter from Berklee 20 years ago. And I am very skeptical that I would have felt like this today if it weren't for those series of psychedelic experiences and choosing to work with therapists and having the courage and the tenacity to work on myself and to face the fears, to be okay with having a bad trip. And I had other good ones too that were helpful after that. In a way, yeah, it's made me more creative. It's probably connected things in the brain, and I have some cool songs I've written about, like, the trip experiences, and it's definitely given me new perspective on things. But it's also like it made me, like, believe in myself. And 20 years ago, I was maybe about to believe in myself when I was about to go to Berklee, but then I stopped. And then I think for the first time now I do.
So I've heard the song and it's great.
Thanks.
How is it being released? How can we find it?
You can find all the information about that by going to connoreko.com. Again, that's CONNEREKO. And you can also find me on Instagram at connoreko. And that will be available on Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, Amazon, all the streaming services that there are. But there will also be a YouTube release, because the song is kind of special in how it was created. Everything that releases today is, like, so overly produced. And in a way, you feel as an artist that you have to do that too. And I was like, screw that. I want to go and record the song live and raw, uncut. And that's what we did. And that's how I'm going to release it first. The song is a live in studio track, but there's also going to be video footage of that. And which will coincide with that is a documentary about, like, kind of some of the stuff we talked about, but also, like, more in depth the meaning of the song. And I like the meaning behind the lyrics and how it was made. And that will all come out through YouTube.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to be on your show. And I just want to, express to you that this has also been very therapeutic for me.
Well, thank you.
And if you're out there and you're listening to this, like, I know it can be hopeless. I know what that's like. But just there's always a candle in the dark. For me, that candle in the dark was the piano in the corner. For you, it might be something else. But just don't give up. Don't give up. There's other people out there, and you can do it. Dust and shatter. Will I make it out? I'm standing up. 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 Up against the crashing of our waves. We'll be enough. In that family and so-called friends, smiles, was it all pretend? Or should I die? Not before I board this train for the life that lost. Check my baggage, lift them bridges, face the pain that it caused. I'm standing up, I'm standing up. 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 Up against the crashing of our waves, we'll be enough. We'll be enough. No, no. We'll be enough. Close my eyes tonight.
Lean back into my dreams, we'll see the crust of fire of our desires and the beating of the sun. Past the tower of all this power and the shame of what we've done.